These 6 examples all deal with function notation. Now, using these following formulas that we have up top, we're going to solve the following examples. Let's start with example 1. Using the functions above, determine f of a. So because we need to find f of a, let's use our f of x function. So we're going to have f, and wherever we see of x, we're going to leave it with empty brackets. So f of empty brackets equals empty brackets plus 3. Now, wherever we see these empty brackets, we want to replace it with a, because we need to find f of a. So now we have f of a equals a plus 3. And that is our function to determine f of a. Next, moving on to example 2, we want to use the functions above to determine f of b plus g of b. So when using this f of b, we're going to use again this f of x function, and when using g of b, we're going to use this g of x function. But wherever we see an x in both functions, we're going to replace it with empty brackets. So we have f of empty brackets equals empty brackets plus 3, and g of empty brackets equals empty brackets squared. Now we need to combine these two together. So we have f of b, so we have empty brackets plus 3 plus g of b, so empty brackets squared. Now wherever we see empty brackets, we want to place them with b. So we have b plus 3 plus b squared as our final answer. Now example 3 wants us to use the functions above to determine g of a minus h of a. So we're going to use g of x and h of x. But again, wherever we see an x, we're going to leave it with empty brackets. G of empty brackets equals empty brackets squared, and h of empty brackets equals empty brackets minus 5. Now again, we want to combine these two because they both have the same function of a. So we are going to have empty brackets squared minus empty brackets minus 5, and wherever we see an empty brackets, we're going to replace it with an a. So we have a squared minus a minus 5 as our final answer. Now again, this only works when you have your g of a and h of a with the same variable inside the brackets. Otherwise, we have to use a different method. So moving on to example 4, we see that we're going to have to use our different method because they don't contain the same variable inside the brackets. So example 4 wants us to use the functions above to determine g of a minus f of negative b. So g of a wants us to use g of x, so we're going to do g of empty brackets equals empty brackets squared, and then f of x is f of empty brackets equals empty brackets plus 3. Now with this g of empty brackets, we want to replace the empty brackets with a. So we're going to have g of a equals a squared, and then this f of empty brackets, we're going to replace it with a negative b. So we have negative b plus 3. Now we want to combine these two. So we have g of a, which is a squared, minus f of negative b, which is negative b plus 3. But that has to be in brackets. And now we want to feed this negative through to everything inside our brackets. So we have a squared, negative 1 times negative b gives us positive b, and then negative 1 times positive 3 gives us negative 3. So a squared plus b minus 3 is our final answer. Now moving on to example 5, they want us to use the functions above to determine f of g of z. So when we have a multiplication between the f and the g of z, we are going to start with g of z first. So we're going to use g of x, but wherever we see the empty brackets, we're going to replace it with a z this time. So now we have g of z equals z squared. So now that we know that this equals g of z, we want to find f of g of z. So we want to find f of z squared, because that's what g of z equals. So now wherever we see an x in f of x, we're going to replace it with empty brackets. And then we're going to place these empty brackets with z squared. So now we have f of z squared equals z squared plus 3. So z squared plus 3 is our final answer. Moving on to our final example, they want us to use the functions above to determine f of y times g of z. So when using f of y, we're going to use f of x, but wherever we see an x, we're going to leave it empty brackets. And then whenever we see an x in g of x, we're going to leave it with empty brackets again. Now this f of x, we have the variable y inside our brackets. So we're going to replace our empty brackets with y. And our g of x has a variable of z. There should be brackets right there, but our variable is going to be z. So wherever we see an empty brackets, we're going to replace it with a z. So we have g of z equals z squared. Now we need to multiply these two together. So we are going to have y plus 3 multiplied by z squared. Now you can either factor this z into every number inside the brackets, or you can leave it like this. If you factor the z squared into everything, you have y times z squared plus 3 times z squared. So if you want to write your answer like this or like this, both are fine and both are right.